When fake officers hired by the local homeowner association brutally assaulted 16-year-old Sarah Jennings, her future was shattered in an instant. Behind them stood Ronald Cruz, a powerful businessman desperate to bury the truth and protect his influence. But Mark Jennings, a former Navy SEAL and a determined father, refused to stay silent and launched a battle that would shake the entire community. Listen closely to how one family's courage exposed the lies and why, in the end, justice finally prevailed. The morning was the kind that made Mark Jennings believe, even if just for a moment, that the world could be simple again. A soft breeze stirred the palm trees lining the quiet streets of Willow Creek. Birds chirped lazily, and somewhere down the block, a sprinkler ticked rhythmically, casting rainbows over a manicured lawn. Mark stood barefoot on his porch, the wood warm under his feet, cradling a mug of strong black coffee. He watched his daughter, 16-year-old Sarah, laugh and spin on her roller skates, her ponytail flying as she raced herself up and down their little cul-de-sac. She was a blur of denim shorts, a faded yellow t-shirt, and pure joy. Every few seconds, she glanced back at her father with a wide, playful grin, and Mark could not help but smile. After everything he had seen and survived during his years in the Navy SEALs, this, a morning of peace, of family, of simplicity, felt like the greatest reward. Neighbors waved from their yards, a golden retriever barked from behind a fence. The scene was so perfect it felt almost fragile, like something precious that could vanish if you looked away too long. Mark took a slow sip of coffee, committing the moment to memory. That was when the noise shattered it all. The sudden harsh screech of tires on asphalt sliced through the calm like a knife. Mark's head snapped toward the corner of the street, instincts kicking in before his mind caught up. A black SUV, windows tinted dark, careened around the bend and slammed to a halt right next to Sarah. The doors burst open. Two men jumped out dressed in dark tactical-style uniforms that could easily be mistaken for police gear if you did not know what real law enforcement looked like. They moved with chilling speed, their boots pounding the pavement as they rushed toward Sarah. Their faces were grim, their bodies tense, like men who believed they had authority, or at least who wanted others to believe it. Mark's eyes scanned them automatically, no visible badges, no body cameras, no marked vehicle. In a split second, every ounce of training, every muscle memory from a lifetime of facing threats flooded back. His stomach dropped, his vision narrowed. Something was wrong, deeply, terribly wrong. Sarah froze at first, caught off guard by the sudden approach. One of the men barked something unintelligible, but Mark barely heard it over the roaring in his ears. The coffee mug slipped from his fingers, crashing onto the porch and sending shards across the wooden boards. He did not even flinch. Mark was already moving, fast, purposeful, and deadly calm. His body acted before his mind could weigh consequences. His little girl was in danger and nothing else mattered. And somewhere deep in the pit of his gut, Mark Jennings knew whatever peace they had found in Willow Creek was gone. It happened so fast that for a heartbeat, Mark could not believe what he was seeing. One moment Sarah was standing there, frozen like a deer in headlights. The next the two men lunged, not with caution, not with professionalism, but with a brutal kind of force that made Mark's blood run cold. They grabbed her by the arms and shoulders, yanking her off balance. Sarah let out a startled cry, stumbling backward, but they did not slow down. They drove her down onto the asphalt with a sickening thud, pinning her small frame beneath them. Her scream tore through the air, raw, panicked, unmistakably real. It sliced straight through Mark's chest, rooting him to the ground for a half-second that felt like an eternity. He watched in horror as one of the men shoved Sarah's arms behind her back at an unnatural angle, forcing her face roughly against the rough pavement. She struggled instinctively, gasping for breath, but the men pressed down harder, treating her like a criminal in the middle of the street. All around, the neighbors stood frozen on their lawns. Some clutched their phones but hesitated, confusion etched into their faces. Were these real officers? Was this official business? No one seemed sure and no one moved. Mark did not have that luxury. His instincts, sharpened by years of operating in the most dangerous corners of the world, surged to life. In a single fluid motion, he pushed off the porch, sprinting across the grass. His heart hammered against his ribs, not from fear but from pure, unstoppable adrenaline. His right hand moved to his hip, where his legally owned pistol rested in its holster, a tool he prayed he would never have to use in this neighborhood. There was no room for hesitation now. Every muscle, every decision screamed in unison, protect her now. Mark's mind locked onto one goal, getting to Sarah before something irreversible happened. The distance between them, though only a few dozen feet, felt like 1,000 miles, and with every step he took, the world narrowed down to a single burning point: his daughter's safety. Mark's heart pounded against his ribs, but his mind was clear, sharper than it had been in years. The world seemed to slow around him, the chaos folding into something cold and focused. He drew his weapon in one smooth, trained motion, leveling it at the two men with a grip so steady it looked like an extension of his own body. Years of experience, moments far worse than this, had forged that steadiness into him. There was no room for second-guessing, not now. He planted his feet firmly on the pavement and raised his voice, cutting across the street like a thunderclap. Let her go now. It was not just loud, it was commanding, the voice of someone who had once given orders under fire, someone who understood exactly how to take control when every second mattered. The two men flinched, their momentum stalling for a fraction of a second. Confusion clouded their faces. They had expected fear, compliance, maybe hesitation. They had not expected him. Mark's eyes, sharp and unblinking, tracked every movement. He saw it, the slight shift, the tightening of muscle as one of them jerked a hand toward something clipped at his side. Mark did not wait to see what it was. His fingers squeezed the trigger, and a sharp report cracked the still morning air. The bullet struck the ground just inches from their boots, kicking up a puff of dirt and grass. It was not a random shot. It was a message delivered with absolute precision. One more move and you will not get another warning. The effect was immediate. The man's hand froze mid-motion. Both of them stumbled backward instinctively, releasing Sarah without thought, their hands flying into the air as they babbled overlapping excuses, words about confusion, about mistaken identity, about following orders. Mark barely registered the noise. He had eyes only for Sarah. She dropped to the pavement, coughing and gasping for breath, one hand reaching instinctively toward him. The sight of her, the pain in her eyes, the fear twisting her face, carved into Mark deeper than any battlefield wound ever had. He shifted slightly, positioning his body between Sarah and the men, the pistol still trained dead center between them. On your knees, hands where I can see them, he said, voice low, steady and absolutely final. The men obeyed without question, dropping heavily to their knees, their hands shaking above their heads. They muttered apologies, tried to explain themselves, but Mark did not care. Their words meant nothing. The neighborhood was deadly silent now. A few brave neighbors peeked from behind cars or hedges, phones clutched in trembling hands, recording the aftermath but too frightened to get closer. Someone had finally called the real police, but in that moment, Mark knew he was the only law here. He was the shield standing between his daughter and whatever nightmare these men had planned. From somewhere down the street, the faint wail of sirens rose, growing louder and closer with each second. Mark did not let his guard down, not even as the first patrol cars swung into view, red and blue lights painting the houses in frantic color. He kept his stance solid, his weapon ready, until uniformed officers poured out of the cruisers, weapons drawn, shouting commands that mirrored his own. Only then, only when real law stepped in, did Mark lower his pistol, but the fire inside him, the primal need to protect what mattered most, did not extinguish so easily. It was only the beginning. The bright fluorescent lights of the hospital waiting room buzzed overhead, their cold glare doing nothing to chase away the heavy fog that had settled over Mark's mind. Time lost all meaning as he sat slouched in a stiff plastic chair, hands clasped together so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. Down the hallway, hidden behind swinging double doors, doctors worked to assess the damage that should never have touched someone like Sarah. When the door finally swung open and a nurse called his name, Mark rose to his feet as if in slow motion, every step toward the exam room feeling heavier than the last. Inside, Sarah lay curled on the hospital bed, dwarfed by the white sheets and the machines that beeped quietly around her. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying, though she tried to wipe them quickly when she saw him. Even now, even in pain, she did not want to worry her father. Mark's heart broke in a way he had not known was possible. He crossed the room and sat beside her, careful not to touch any of the wires attached to her arms. She gave him a small, trembling smile, one that stabbed deeper than any words could. The doctor entered a moment later, holding a clipboard, his face grim. Mark stood, his posture instinctively stiffening, ready for bad news, but no amount of preparation could have softened the blow. The doctor spoke calmly, clinically. 6 fractures in her lower back, compression injuries from blunt force trauma, severe bruising around the spine. Mark listened, every word slicing into him, though outwardly he remained still, his jaw clenched so tightly it ached. Months of recovery, the doctor said carefully, maybe longer. There were risks too, nerve damage, mobility issues, things Mark could not even allow himself to fully hear, not yet. Sarah whimpered softly, trying to turn on her side but wincing in pain. Mark immediately moved closer, resting a gentle hand near hers on the bed. He wanted to scoop her up, to fix this, to shield her from everything bad in the world, but all he could do was be there, and it was not enough. It would never be enough. As the doctor left them alone, Mark sat back down on sound, staring into the floor, his fists clenching and unclenching in his lap. They had done this, those men, those cowards who thought wearing imitation uniforms gave them the right to terrorize a child. They were not police officers, they were not protectors, they were thugs hiding behind a fake badge. And they had been hired by the very people who were supposed to protect this community, the homeowner association, the so-called guardians of the neighborhood who had sanctioned this madness. Mark's blood boiled beneath the surface, not just with anger but with a cold, steady resolve that grew stronger with every passing second. His daughter's life had been torn apart by their arrogance, their recklessness, and Mark Jennings, who had survived wars, deserts, oceans and losses beyond counting, would make sure they answered for it, no matter what it took. He reached out again, carefully brushing a strand of hair from Sarah's forehead. She looked up at him with those same stubborn, brave eyes he had known since the day she was born. Mark squeezed her hand gently, willing strength into her fragile body. This was not the end, not for her, not for him. This was only the beginning. Mark Jennings had seen injustice before. He had seen it in foreign lands, in places where power went unchecked and the innocent suffered without reason. But he had never expected to find it here, in the heart of his own community, hidden behind manicured lawns, smiling neighbors and crisp white fences. In the days after the attack, Mark clung to a single hope, that justice would move quickly, as surely as it should in any place that claimed to be fair. At first, it seemed like it might. Police reports were filed, witnesses gave statements, doctors documented Sarah's injuries in meticulous detail. The facts were so clear, so brutal in their simplicity, that Mark believed there could be no other outcome. Accountability, justice, protection for the next child who might otherwise suffer the same fate. But soon, small signs began to appear, cracks forming in what should have been a straight path toward the truth. Phone calls went unanswered, meetings were postponed without reason. Local officials, once so eager to offer their sympathy, became strangely cautious, their words wrapped in layers of hesitation. Mark, standing in the sterile hallways of city offices, felt the change in the air, the way eyes averted just slightly when he approached, the way conversations hushed the moment he stepped into the room. And then the real blow came. The Homeowner Association issued an official statement. Ronald Cruz, the Homeowner Association president, a wealthy, polished businessman known for throwing grand neighborhood events and attending city fundraisers, called the attack on Sarah a misunderstanding. He praised the dedication of the security volunteers. He claimed there was confusion about Sarah's identity. He urged everyone to move forward in a spirit of healing. Mark read the statement twice, each word burning deeper than the last. There was no apology, no accountability, no justice, just polished lies designed to protect reputations and shield the people truly responsible. He closed the document slowly, his jaw tightening. Mark had spent years of his life in places where systems failed, where those with power twisted the rules to suit their own needs. He recognized the signs now, the careful wording, the legal posturing, the quiet maneuvering behind the scenes to make the whole thing disappear before it could stain the wrong names. The message was clear: they were not going to do the right thing, they were going to protect themselves. Mark felt the familiar coil of anger tightening in his chest, but beneath it, something stronger stirred, a deep, unshakable resolve. His military training had taught him many things: how to adapt, how to plan under pressure, how to fight when the odds were stacked high and hope was a distant flicker. But most of all, it had taught him one unbreakable truth: when the system fails you, you do not back down, you stand up, you fight. He would not let them bury what had happened to Sarah under paperwork and polished speeches. He would not allow the story to fade quietly into the background, forgotten by all but those who carried the scars. If the people in charge would not deliver justice, then Mark Jennings would find another way. He stood up from the stiff government office chair, straightened his shoulders, and walked out into the sunlight. The fight was not over, it was just beginning. While Sarah fought her own battle, pushing through grueling sessions of physical therapy, her face tight with pain but never surrendering, Mark launched a battle of a different kind. He could not sit by and wait for justice to come to them. He had seen too much, lived through too many broken promises to believe in waiting. If the system had turned its back on his daughter, then he would build his own path forward, brick by brick. At first it was lonely work. Mark walked door to door in Willow Creek, knocking quietly on the homes of neighbors who had witnessed the attack or heard the stories whispered through the community. Many were hesitant to speak, fear weighed heavily in their eyes, fear of retaliation, of being dragged into something messy, of losing their place in the carefully polished world the homeowner association had built. Mark understood their fear. He had faced fear himself more times than he could count. But he also knew something else: silence was the true enemy. Patiently, respectfully, he listened. He promised to protect their identities if they wished, and slowly, like a trickle carving its way through stone, the truth began to surface. Testimonies, some whispered across doorsteps, some scribbled in nervous handwriting, painted a chilling picture. The rogue security force had not just targeted Sarah. There were other children, other teenagers, pushed, shouted at, intimidated for minor infractions, for simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Mark documented everything. He gathered photos, videos, grainy cell phone recordings showing uniformed men behaving like enforcers, not protectors. He built timelines, matched faces to names, traced connections back to Ronald Cruz and his circle of influence within the homeowner association. What started as a personal investigation slowly grew into something larger. At first the whispers spread only among the residents, conversations at backyard barbecues, at the edge of soccer games, in the aisles of the local grocery store. Then one neighbor, an elderly woman who had lived in Willow Creek for over 30 years, shared Mark's findings with her nephew, a journalist at a small local news outlet. The first story broke quietly, just a few paragraphs tucked inside a midweek edition, but it was enough. Within days, larger stations picked up the story. Reporters showed up with cameras and microphones, asking questions the homeowner association could no longer ignore. Images of Sarah's injuries appeared alongside interviews with parents, with frightened teenagers, with citizens who had once trusted their neighborhood's leadership and now felt betrayed. Mark Jennings became more than a father fighting for his daughter. He became a symbol, a reminder that even in the quietest suburbs, even behind the friendliest smiles, justice sometimes needed a voice strong enough to shatter the silence. And people listened, not because he shouted, not because he demanded, but because he stood firm, steady, relentless, and unwilling to back down. The tide was beginning to turn. Mark could feel it, like the first distant rumble of an approaching storm, and this time he was not standing alone. The first cracks in the wall came quietly, an official statement from the sheriff's department announcing an internal review of private security groups operating without proper oversight. It was small, it was technical, but it was a start. Then one morning, Mark received the call he had been waiting for. Real law enforcement, under mounting public pressure and media scrutiny, had acted. The two men who had attacked Sarah, who had claimed the authority they never possessed, were arrested on multiple charges including assault and impersonating officers. The news spread like wildfire. Every headline told a piece of the story about the fake enforcers, about the dark underbelly of the Willow Creek Homeowner Association, about the man behind it all, Ronald Cruz. Investigations dug deeper, uncovering illegal contracts, unregistered security operations, and payments quietly funneled through homeowner association funds without the community's knowledge. Civil lawsuits stacked up like thunderclouds. Families who had stayed silent for fear of retaliation found the courage to step forward, and politicians, once eager to pose for photos at Willow Creek summer picnics, scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal. Their polished statements filled with urgent denials and promises of reform. Through it all, Mark Jennings stood firm. He did not gloat, he did not seek revenge, he sought something far more powerful: truth and accountability. When the first court hearings began, Mark walked up the courthouse steps with Sarah by his side. She was still recovering, walking slowly with care, but she stood tall, her chin lifted with quiet defiance. The crowd outside was a sea of cameras, microphones, reporters shouting questions into the morning air. Mark paused at the top step, squeezing Sarah's hand gently. The flashes of the camera sparked like tiny lightning strikes around them, but he did not flinch. He looked out over the gathering of journalists, neighbors and strangers who had followed their journey, some cheering, some simply watching with silent hope. When he spoke, his voice was clear and steady. No one is above the law, especially not when our children are the ones paying the price. The words were not delivered with anger, they were not shouted or forced. They came from a place deeper, the place inside a father's heart, where fear, pain and love had been forged into something unbreakable. The crowd quieted for a moment, letting his words hang heavy in the cool morning air. It was not just a statement, it was a promise to Sarah, to every family in Willow Creek, and to anyone watching who had ever been told to stay quiet. The tide had turned, and it was not stopping. The trial was long and tiring, but from the very start, the truth stayed strong. Mark Jennings sat quietly at the front of the courtroom, his presence calm and unshakable. This was not about revenge for him, it was about something deeper, making sure that what happened to Sarah would never happen to another family. The defense tried to soften the image of the fake officers, saying they were men who had just made mistakes. But the proof, videos, people who saw it, and Sarah's own words left no room for doubt. The jury saw it clearly: cruelty, wrong behavior, broken trust. When Sarah spoke in court, the whole room changed. Still healing, still carrying the weight of her pain, she spoke with a steady voice and strong courage. Her words did not ask for sympathy, she told the truth clearly and bravely, and by the time she stepped down, there was not one person in the room who was not touched by her strength. The result came quickly. The fake officers were found guilty and sent to jail for hurting her and pretending to be police. Ronald Cruz, exposed and ashamed, quit in shame and now faced serious charges of planning and not doing his duty. As reporters rushed to catch people's reactions, Mark simply reached for Sarah's hand. She squeezed back, stronger now, not just in body but in spirit. In that quiet moment, Mark saw that the most important win was not in the news or in court. It was seeing his daughter rise above it all, standing proud on her own. Justice had been done, and something even more powerful had been born: inner strength that no one could ever take away. The seasons changed and life in Willow Creek changed too. Months after the court fight ended, Sarah still had signs of what was done to her. Some were easy to see: light scars on her back, a stiffness in her steps on cold mornings. Others were hidden, like moments when loud places made her feel trapped or when sudden sounds made her jump. But those marks showed only part of her story. Because beside those, something greater had grown: strength, not the kind kept inside, but strength shown to the world, shaped by struggle. Sarah chose not to hide or let her pain rule her. She turned it into power, using her voice to speak for those who could not. She became a supporter of children's rights and better safety rules in communities. Meetings that were once quiet and nearly empty were now full of people who came to hear her speak. Leaders who once ignored these hard truths now sat and listened, as Sarah explained them clearly in a way only someone who had lived through it could. Mark often stood at the back during those meetings, arms folded, listening as his daughter spoke with calm, strong confidence. He did not need to say anything. He just watched, his heart full in a way words could not fully show. Pride, thankfulness, a sad ache for all they had lost, and deep respect for everything Sarah had become. What had started as a nightmare outside their house had grown into something bigger, a change that reached beyond their home, beyond their neighborhood. It was not about revenge, it was about change, real lasting change. Mark now understood that real justice was not just about punishing those who hurt others, it was about making sure no one could do it again. As he looked at Sarah, standing proud and strong, he knew they had built something greater than he had ever hoped for. And for Mark Jennings, that was the only victory that truly mattered.